One of the biggest risks to our long-term health, not just as professional wrestlers, but as human beings, is an injury to our brain. That's why today we're going to take some time to talk about the reality of concussions. I'm Mike Quackenbush. This is Till We Make It. And if you're passionate about professional wrestling and you're never done learning all about it, well, I happen to think you're in the right place, my friend. Consider subscribing to the channel now. That way you never miss out on a video. Let's start today's discussion with a simple definition. What is a concussion? Well, it's the type of injury that occurs when our brains briefly touch our skulls. And this can cause bruising and swelling of the brain, and it can also damage the axons and neurons inside the brain. It could result if we're struck in the head, or from the kind of scenario we might associate with whiplash, like when a car makes a very sudden stop. An event of that type could cause the brain to float through the cerebrospinal fluid and briefly touch the hard skull. And each concussion event is unique unto itself. Even if you and I were in the exact same car accident, sat right beside each other, we could end up with two very different grades of concussion. I should probably mention here, I'm not a doctor. So for today's video, I'm going to lean very heavily on the research done by the Sports Legacy Institute. This is Christopher Nowinski's book, Head Games. I think it should be required reading for everyone involved in professional wrestling. And I want to extend my thanks to Chris and the Sports Legacy Institute for being so willing to communicate over email and help me put together some of the vital bullet points of today's video for you. Additionally, I'm very grateful to Dr. David Clark. His willingness to share his expertise about brain injury, rehabilitation, and functional neurology have been invaluable. Concussions fall under a larger umbrella term, that of traumatic brain injury, commonly abbreviated as TBI. But our knowledge and appreciation of these types of injuries, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, has really evolved. And that has reshaped our attitudes about concussions and the way that we treat them. Back in the 90s, when I was breaking into professional wrestling, it was not unusual to get a concussion on Friday night and be back between the ropes on Saturday night. In fact, that was probably the norm because we just didn't have much of an appreciation for the severity of these types of brain injuries. Returning to regular activity, especially athletic activity, too quickly after the concussion event occurs could lead to devastating consequences. We are risking long-term damage to our brain if we do not allow enough time to properly recover from the injury. In even mild cases, the human brain needs 2 to 4 weeks to heal itself, and in more severe cases, the recovery process can last months, if not in excess of a year. Remember, a brain injury is still an injury, even if it is not accompanied by any obvious physical signs the way that a black eye might be or a dislocated shoulder would be. So how can we go about treating a concussion? What should you do if you suspect you've suffered a concussion? First and foremost, you've got to get checked by your doctor. Understand that a concussion in and of itself is an injury, but the concussive blow could bring with it other types of injuries which fall underneath that umbrella of traumatic brain injuries. Here's one dangerous example: bleeding of the brain. Someone suffering from bleeding of the brain risks slipping into a coma and even death. So in order to determine exactly the scope of your injury and to rule out the things that you don't have, a series of images might be taken of your brain, including an MRI or a CT scan. Once your doctor is able to determine the full extent and all the various features of the injury that you've suffered, then they'll be able to prescribe a treatment. I want to call out some misconceptions about concussions that Christopher Nowinski feels might be especially relevant to us, an audience of professional wrestlers. Number one, getting your bell rung, those little dings that we feel, could be enough to constitute a concussion. You do not have to be knocked out, to lose time, or black out thereafter to have incurred a concussion. And this certainly runs contrary to the old obsolete thought I remember, which was, If you took a shot but managed to avoid losing consciousness, that meant you did not have a concussion. That is a misconception. It is not true. A second thing Chris thought was important to share with fellow pros is about how dangerous it is to continue on with a pro wrestling performance after a concussion event has occurred. And I got to admit, his logic is difficult to argue with. Chris says pro wrestling is dangerous enough. It becomes far more dangerous when one person is trying to perform with a malfunctioning brain. I wish I'd heard that 20 years ago. A third and final point that Chris wanted to share is that concussions are not the only threat to the long-term health of our brains. For example, there is PCS, post-concussion syndrome. This is when the symptoms of the concussion continue to linger even months after the event has occurred. Even repeated blows to the head which are subconcussive in force, not powerful enough to cause a concussion, these blows can lead to increased risk of CTE, otherwise known as chronic traumatic encephalopathy. People that suffer from CTE might have problems with their memory or thinking. They could experience permanent behavioral or mood changes as early as in their 30s. To reiterate, repeated blows to the head, even those that are not of concussion level force, can contribute to the increased risk of CTE. Lastly, I want to offer up a list of the most common concussion symptoms, so you might be in a position to help someone who can't help themselves. People suffering from concussion may experience headache, nausea, dizziness or a loss of balance, vision problems including difficulty focusing their eyes or a strong reaction to bright lights like oncoming headlights in traffic, memory lapses like the inability to remember the match they just had or how they got to the venue. Someone becomes non-responsive, meaning they don't respond verbally or they have a vacant look in their eyes as if they are unaware of the room around them, almost in a dazed state. These non-responsive states could escalate to a loss of consciousness. If you are feeling these symptoms after a suspected concussion event, or you observe these symptoms in someone who thinks they may have a concussion, seek immediate medical attention. And remember this, symptoms may not become immediately evident. Some will emerge gradually in the 2 to 24 hours that follow the concussion event. That's why it's important to monitor someone after they suspect they have had a concussion, even if in the moment they appear to evince none of those symptoms. In the process of making this video for you, I sure learned a lot of new things, and I can assure you I'll continue to learn. I'll continue to grow. But if knowing more about this particular topic is something you think would be beneficial here on the Till We Make It channel, please let me know down below in the comments.